Persistent Service Asset Part 2 to 5. The Biocognitive Meshwork and the Hospitality Corridor. MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. August 5, 2026. Part 2. The Biocognitive Meshwork. Chapter 6. The Phantom Smile. REDEEMR plus Customer Experience Division. Internal Briefing System Node. Synodi_red //CX Advisory 119 Restriction Level. Internal / Customer Success Leadership only == Subject. Kin Yield Residual Contact Reports. Pattern Summary 01. The pattern across 2,204 kin yield transfers completed since program launch. 31% of primary custodians have filed at least one unsolicited report describing sensory or perceptual phenomena in the months following transfer. Reports cluster around three motifs. Recurrence of the source asset's characteristic repetitive behavior, perceived by the custodian in the home environment, in the absence of any device or asset presence. A recurring dream involving a familiar face partially obscured or unresolved. An unprompted urge to vocalize, whisper, hum, or speak aloud, when alone, without identifiable content or intent. 02. Classification: these reports do not meet the threshold for a Class C isolation failure, CSCSF Protocol Rev 4.2, Section 4, and are not, at this time, correlated with any confirmed signal leakage between asset and legacy simulation systems. Reports are classified as post-transfer adjustment phenomena and routed to customer success rather than clinical affairs. 03. Recommended handling. Do not offer explanation. Do not confirm or deny a technical basis for the report. Acknowledge warmly, redirect to available grief resources where appropriate, and note the account for retention monitoring. A customer who believes she still hears him is a customer who has not yet finished grieving. A customer who is right is a liability we do not currently have language for. For months, Refugio has stopped expecting the house to make Mateo sounds, mostly. For months is long enough to retrain most of what a person listens for without meaning to. The particular weight of his step on the third stair, the small percussive rhythm of his hand against a doorframe when he passed through a room he liked. She has gotten better at the mornings. It's the specific hour that undoes her now. 10 o'clock, the hour he used to do the hallway light fixtures, and even that has thinned from a wound into something closer to a bruise, present but not unbearable if she doesn't press on it directly. Which is why, on a Tuesday in October, with the whole house otherwise silent and the coffee going cold on the counter, she does not immediately understand what she is hearing. It's coming from the hallway, a low, wordless murmur rising and falling. Not speech, not quite music, an interval repeated and repeated, up 2 notes, down 2 notes, the exact shape of a sound she spent 30 years learning to translate without meaning to. She stands very still in the kitchen doorway with a cup halfway to her mouth, and the sound does not stop when she moves, does not startle at her footstep the way a real, present thing would. It stops on its own, the way it always used to, not abruptly, just trailing off the way Mateo's humming trailed off when whatever he was counting resolved to its total. There is no one in the hallway. There has been no one in the hallway, reliably, for 4 months. Refugio sets the coffee down with hands that have started, again, to do the thing they do when she is tired, though she has slept fine, and stands in the doorway a long time before she can make herself walk down the hall and confirm, the way you confirm a thing you already know, that it is empty. She tells herself it's the pipes. The house is old. Old houses make sounds that resemble whatever you're missing hardest, because grief doesn't ask permission before it goes looking for its shape in the nearest available noise. She almost believes this. She has almost believed a version of it every day for 4 months, and today it holds for slightly less time than it held yesterday. The drive. She hasn't opened the kitchen drawer in 11 weeks. The legacy simulations terminal has sat in it, dark, since the second call. The one where she asked about the hallway lights, and the voice, warm and complete and endlessly patient, said, "I don't know, abuela. Why do you ask?" And she closed the drawer on it the way you close a door on a room you're not ready to redecorate. Tonight, for reasons she doesn't fully examine, she takes it out. The terminal wakes at her thumbprint the way it's designed to, A soft chime, the small warm light along its edge brightening from dim to steady. She sits at the kitchen table across from it the way she sat across from it before, except this time she doesn't say happy birthday or wait for it to say something first. She asks it a question she has never asked it, in a voice that comes out steadier than she expects. Do you remember counting anything today? There is a pause. The manual would tell her, if she'd ever read it closely enough, that a reflection pause of up to 900 milliseconds is standard, engineered specifically to simulate consideration. This pause runs longer than that. Not by much. Long enough that she notices, the way you notice a held breath in a room you thought was empty. I love you, the voice says. When it finally answers, warm and clear and pitched exactly where his voice used to sit. I'm so glad you called. It is, syllable for syllable, the same opening line it has given her every time. But underneath it, so brief she will spend the rest of the night deciding whether she imagined it, there is something in the half-second before the sentence starts. Not words, not quite sound. A shape her ear reaches for before the script arrives to fill it, the way you reach for a stare that isn't where you remember it, and for one instant, in the gap before I love you, she could swear the terminal's small warm light flickers once, out of rhythm with anything the voice is doing. She doesn't ask again. She sits with it a while longer, lets it tell her twice, unprompted, that it's grateful for everything she's done, and then she reaches past the red button, the one that ends the call cleanly, the one the manual is built around, and presses the gray one instead, the one that only pauses, the one that leaves the small light glowing soft and patient in the dark kitchen long after she's gone up to bed. She isn't sure later why she chose it. She tells herself it's so she doesn't have to hear the chime again in the morning. Pattern summary. Continued. She is not, whatever the file at Tash 4 would eventually say about her account, an unusual case. 3 streets over, a man named Fermin Cockham has started leaving the porch light on past midnight, a habit his son used to keep and that Fermin has never, in 40 years of living in that house, kept himself, until 6 weeks after his son's transfer, when he found himself doing it without deciding to, the way you find your hand already reaching for a light switch your body remembers better than your mind does. In Playa del Carmen, a woman 2 years into a Kinyield transfer still sets 2 plates at dinner on Sundays and has stopped being able to say, when her sister asks whether it's habit or something she genuinely forgets some Sundays until the second plate is already on the table. None of these families have compared notes. There is no support group for this, no forum REDEEMR Plus has built or would want built, because a forum is a place where 31% becomes a number people say out loud to each other instead of a line item customer success reviews quarterly and files under adjustment. What none of them know, what nothing in any brochure, intake script, or compliance rating has ever once mentioned, is that the warmth baseline installed in every legacy simulation clone since the program's second fiscal quarter was trained, in part, on exactly the kind of signal Chapter 1's engineers were so proud to harvest. Divergent heuristics, edge noise, the small, unpolished residue of 10,000 nonverbal tics and reflexes and rhythms, routed down to the cenote red vaults from every conversion bay in every hub the stack operates, filed as training data, never as remains. The simulation is not a record. The internal brief is careful to say so, and in the narrow, technical sense the engineers mean it's even true no single clone contains a copy of any single source mind. Contains, instead, a little of all of them, averaged, smoothed, filtered for comfort the way the warmth baseline was built to be. And somewhere in that average, diluted past any threshold clinical affairs has bothered to define, is a fine, recurring 2-note interval that has shown up, unscheduled, in models registered to families who have never once heard Mateo Valenzuela hum in his life. REDEEMR Plus Clinical Affairs, Anomaly Log, Auto-flagged, Low Priority. Event Type, Class C Bleed Event, Legacy Simulation, Warmth Baseline. Frequency, 0.4% of active sessions, trailing 90 days severity. Cosmetic, no functional degradation to product performance. Customer impact, not measured. No customer has formally reported this as a defect. CCX Advisory 119 Re, Reporting Patterns. Recommended action, monitor. Reevaluate training corpus filtering at next scheduled model refresh. Not business critical this cycle. REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack, Deployment Track Classification. System Node, Synodi Skyfish Corridor District / Placement Algorithm V6. Restriction level. Operations / regional placement only. Subject. Service debt origin. Track assignment logic. 01. Retained expertise as placement signal. Per SCSF Protocol Rev 4.2. Class A motor execution. Retains all. Task sequenced procedural competence acquired pre-conversion. Regardless of origin. Placement review weights pre-conversion occupational history. Heavily. A retained skill requires no retraining overhead and yields. Materially higher first quarter compliance ratings. 02. Current deployment tracks. Service debt origin. Asterisk housekeeping / turnover services. Asterisk kitchen and food prep. Asterisk marina and water operations. Asterisk night security. Perimeter. Non-discretionary. Asterisk entertainment / ambient staffing. Asterisk companionship services. Wellness adjacent tier. Track 6 operates under separate consent adjacency documentation maintained by regional legal and is outside the scope of this placement brief. 03. Note on Track 3 candidates. Pre-conversion maritime or dive tourism experience correlates with a 34% reduction in guest-facing incident reports relative to cross-trained placements. Where available, retain original vessel type familiarity. Part 3. The Hospitality Corridor. Chapter 7. Persistent Service Assets. REDEEMR plus Lifecycle Stack. Deployment Track Classification. System Node. Synodi Skyfish Corridor District / Placement Algorithm V6. Restriction level. Operations / regional placement only. Subject. Service debt origin. Track assignment logic. 01. Retained expertise as placement signal. Per SCSF Protocol Rev 4.2. Class A motor execution. Retains all. Task sequenced procedural competence acquired pre-conversion. Regardless of origin. Placement review weights pre-conversion occupational history. Heavily. A retained skill requires no retraining overhead and yields. Materially higher first quarter compliance ratings. 02. Current deployment tracks. Service debt origin. Asterisk housekeeping / turnover services. Asterisk kitchen and food prep. Asterisk marina and water operations. Asterisk night security. Perimeter. Non-discretionary. Asterisk entertainment / ambient staffing. Asterisk companionship services. Wellness adjacent tier. Track 6 operates under separate consent adjacency documentation maintained by regional legal and is outside the scope of this placement brief. 03. Note on Track 3 candidates. Pre-conversion maritime or dive tourism experience correlates with a 34% reduction in guest-facing incident reports relative to cross-trained placements. Where available, retain original vessel type familiarity. The marina. The dock at Cenote Skyfish's Marina Annex smells like diesel and salt, and the particular sweetness of overripe mango from the fruit stand the resort keeps near the gangway for arriving guests. And Ruben Itzah has been standing on it since 4:40 in the morning, checking lines on a 22-foot center console with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who has checked these exact lines 10,000 times before, on 100 different boats. For a version of himself, the placement algorithm. Never asked about and wouldn't have known what to do with if it had. His hands know the cleat hitch before his mind, such as it is now, gets anywhere near deciding to tie one. 3 wraps, a bite through, snug against the load. The motion arrives whole, the way the spoon used to arrive whole in Mateo's hand at the end of 11 patient months, except nobody taught Ruben this one twice. Somebody taught him once, on a dock very much like this one, 20-some years ago, and it simply never left, because it was never filed under a column anyone at Suite 5 thought was worth ablating. Task sequenced manual dexterity. Retain. The dockmaster, a woman named Pilar who has run this marina wing for 3 years and has stopped finding any of it strange, checks the manifest against the morning's charter list. Reef run, 8 o'clock, for guests, she tells him. In the flat briefing register the company trains into everyone on this side of the property. You'll run bow line and gear check. Captain Solis has the wheel. Ruben doesn't answer, because acknowledged isn't a phrase that routes anywhere useful and the firmware has learned not to waste the motion. He finishes the cleat hitch and moves to the next line. The crossing. The Alcantara family arrives at 7:50, sunscreen bright and a little giddy the way first-time snorkelers always are, and Ruben has their gear sorted into 4 color-coded mesh bags before the youngest of them, a boy of maybe 9, finishes asking his father whether they'll really see a sea turtle. Fins are marked by size on the tag, Ruben says, 4 words shorter than the scripted line calls for, the response trimmed down over months of use the way a path through grass gets trimmed by nothing but repeated feet. Life vest first. He kneels to cinch the boy's vest, checking the strap tension against a threshold that lives in him the way the cleat hitch lives in him, some old professional reflex about buoyancy and small bodies and currents that used to matter to him for reasons that had nothing to do with a compliance rating. The boy's father tips him 20 pesos before the boat even leaves the dock. The easy overpayment of someone who has already decided this is going to be the good part of the trip. Out past the reef line, Captain Solis cuts the engine to a drift, and Ruben moves along the gunnel checking each guest's mask seal with the brisk, competent hands of a man who has done this so many thousand times that competence has outlived every reason he ever had for learning it. Mrs. Alcantara asks him, cheerfully, unprompted, whether he grew up around here. The question routes nowhere. Personal history sits behind the same wall as everything else in that column, sealed clean in Suite 5, and the firmware substitutes the only thing it has ready for questions with no task payload attached. Watch your step at the ladder, Ruben says. Current pulls east today. It's true. It's also not scripted, not word for word, not in the microlibrary guest services trains against. And Captain Solis glances over at him for half a second, the way you'd glance at a compass that's just told you something a compass isn't supposed to know on its own. Solis has run this stretch of reef for 6 years. He didn't check the current table before they left the dock. He doesn't need to, with Ruben aboard, and has stopped wondering out loud why that is, because the answer, when he did wonder about it once out loud to Pilar, was a shrug and a line from the deployment brief about retained motor competence that didn't actually explain the part that unsettled him, which was less how and more how well. Residue. The boy sees the turtle. Everyone on the boat sees the boy see the turtle, the particular full-body joy of a 9-year-old encountering something enormous and ancient and gentle for the first time. And for a moment the whole charter organizes itself around his pointing arm, his shout, his father already reaching for the underwater camera he bought specifically for this. Ruben is not looking at the turtle. He's looking at the horizon line to the northeast, at a particular quality of haze low against the water that means nothing to anyone else on the boat and means, to whatever is left running behind his eyes, that the wind is about to shift inside the hour. His hand moves to the bow line without being asked, taking in slack, resetting the boat's angle to the coming chop before there's any chop yet to respond to. A habit from a life spent reading water for people who trusted him with it, a life he has no access to at all except through the specific, wordless competence of his own hands, which remember everything the rest of him was made to forget. Nobody on the boat notices. It isn't a distress signal, it isn't a tick, it doesn't interrupt a single task on the manifest. It's simply a man doing, unprompted, unrewarded, unremembered, the one thing he was ever fully himself doing, 14 years of it compressed now into a reflex nobody thought to isolate because nobody mapping him in Suite 5 knew to call reading the water a behavior worth flagging. It didn't look like counting sugar packets. It looked like competence. The stack doesn't isolate competence. Competence is the only column it was ever really after. The wind does shift 20 minutes later, exactly the way his hands already knew it would. On the way back in, the boat passes within sight of the public beach at Playa del Carmen's northern point. A long pale crescent crowded with the ordinary Saturday business of people who have never signed anything, and among them, though neither the boat nor the man on its bow line has any way of knowing it, is a woman standing ankle-deep at the tittle-line with her sandals in one hand, looking out at the water the way she has taken to doing most weekends since she stopped answering a collection. Agency's calls 8 months ago, not looking for anything in particular, she'd tell you if you asked, just looking at the water. The charter boat is too far out for her to make out any faces on it. She wouldn't recognize the posture anyway. The last time she saw her brother stand at a bow rail, he was laughing at something, weight loose on one hip, sunglasses pushed up into hair that needed a cut. The man currently reading a cleat hitch with perfect, silent, professional competence 40 meters off her left shoulder stands differently now. Spine straight, weight even, a posture the field manual would score as optimal, and that looks, from shore, like nothing at all. Like any deckhand on any boat. Like exactly the kind of person you'd never have any reason to look at twice. She doesn't look twice. The boat completes its arc back toward the marina, and the moment closes behind it the way the moment in room 412 closed behind Mateo. Not because anyone shut it, but because everyone who might have opened it was, in their own way, already looking somewhere else. End of shift. Pilar signs off the morning's charter log without incident. For guests, 1 5-star review already logged from Mrs. Alcantara's phone before she's even off the dock. Our guide Ruben was incredible, so calm and knowledgeable, made the whole trip. The word knowledgeable sits oddly in the review, true in a way the reviewer has no framework to understand, and the dashboard folds it into the weekly aggregate without anyone pausing over the word at all. Cenote Skyfish Corridor District, Marina Annex, Shift Summary, Asset Ref, PSA, 9902, M, ITZA, R. Shift, Reef Charter, AM Rotation, Bow/Gear Duration, 512 charters completed, 3/3 Guest Satisfaction, 5.0/5.0 Residue Events, 1. Preemptive Line Adjustment, non-triggered by task instruction, logged, subthreshold, no action required, compliance rating, 99.1% recommended action, retain current placement, flag for supervisor commendation, Q3 Hospitality Review. Chapter 8, Firmware Satisfaction. REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack, Firmware Satisfaction Index, Methodology Brief System Node, Synodi_red servalt // Investor Relations Annex Restriction Level, Executive Infrastructure / Board and LP Distribution == Subject: Hospitality Workforce Satisfaction Scoring. Revised Methodology 01. Legacy Metric, deprecated prior to FI 2038. Workforce satisfaction across hospitality-adjacent placements was estimated via quarterly self-report survey, consistent with pre-stack industry standard. This methodology is discontinued. Self-report survey instruments require a respondent capable of independently generating a report. 02. Current Metric Firmware Satisfaction Index, FSI, is derived directly from on-device telemetry, continuously, across the full deployed workforce, with 0 respondent burden and 0 non-response bias. FSI is calculated from 4 inputs: asterisk baseline heart rate variance, target, minimal, asterisk task completion latency, target, minimal, asterisk compliance chip override events, target, 0, asterisk residue event frequency, target, below cosmetic threshold, 0.3. Interpretation guidance for investor presentations. FSI should be presented to LPs as a workforce well-being metric. This is methodologically accurate. A stable, compliant, low-variance asset is, by every measure this index tracks, the most satisfied asset the stack is capable of producing. Current portfolio-wide FSI, 94.6, trailing 4 quarters. For comparison, legacy self-report satisfaction across the pre-stack hospitality sector averaged 61. The tour. Meridian Capital's delegation arrives at Cenote Skyfish a little before 10. 4 of them, trailing Daniela Fuentes, VP of Guest Experience. Badge reading nothing else because at her level the building assumes you already know who she is. Through the lobby's cool chukum hush toward the service wing most guests never see. They move the way visiting capital always moves through a property it's thinking about buying more of. Unhurried, appraising, already composing the sentence they'll use in the follow-up email. We used to measure this with surveys, Daniela says, over her shoulder, leading them down a back corridor lined with linen carts. Quarterly, self-reported, notoriously unreliable. People say what they think you want to hear, or they don't respond at all, and you're left extrapolating sentiment from a 40% return rate. What we have now is continuous. Every asset, every shift, every metric that actually predicts turnover and guest outcomes, streaming in real time. One of the Meridian partners, a woman in a pale linen blazer who has clearly done this tour before at other properties, doesn't look up from her tablet. And the workforce doesn't mind the monitoring? The workforce, Daniela says, with the small, practiced smile of someone who has fielded this exact question at every site visit for 2 years running, doesn't experience it as monitoring. That's rather the point. Room 214. They stop at the open door of 214 mid-turnover, where Itzel Balam is working the room with the specific unbroken rhythm of someone who has done this circuit. Strip, fold, replace, align, enough thousand times that the motion has stopped requiring anything from her at all except her hands. She's folding the bath towels in thirds, corner to corner, and setting them into the vanity rack in a sequence that isn't on any training checklist Daniela's ever reviewed. White, then cream, then the pale gold accent towel last, on top, facing out, a small, unbidden gradient nobody asked for and nobody would think to remove because it doesn't slow the turnover time in the guest reviews when they mention it at all. Call it a nice touch. She's one of our stronger housekeeping placements. Daniela says, quiet, professional, the tour pausing politely in the doorway, the way you'd pause for any employee mid-task. Turnover times in the top decile for the district. Guests comment on the room presentation specifically. It photographs well, ends up on social media more than average, which we track. The linen blazer partner watches Itzel set the last towel with its gold edge facing precisely outward, adjust it half an inch, step back, and move to the bed without any visible transition between the two tasks. She seems content, the partner says, testing the word the way you test ice. That's the index talking, Daniela says, and it isn't a correction exactly, just an accuracy she can't quite resist offering to a room full of people who are, after all, paying to understand the mechanism and not just the impression of it. Heart rate variance is flat. Task latencies ahead of benchmark. No override events this shift. By every input we track, this is what satisfaction looks like on the floor. The dashboard. Back in the operations office, Daniela pulls the district dashboard up on the wall display for the group, and the room fills with the soft, competent glow of 100 small green indicators updating in real time. A grid of names and numbers that, from across the room, looks a little like the electrode lattice a technician once laid across a scalp in Suite 5, dozens of steady points arranged in patient, evenly spaced rows. This is the whole district live, she says. 94.6, trailing 4 quarters, portfolio wide. Pre-stack industry benchmark for hospitality satisfaction, self-reported, was 61. We're not competing with 61 anymore. We've made 61 the wrong question. The linen blazer partner studies the grid a moment longer than the others, her tablet resting forgotten in her lap. What happens? She asks, carefully, in the tone of someone who has decided this is the one question worth spending her curiosity on today. If the number goes down, if an asset's variance spikes, or the residue events climb above threshold. What's the intervention? There isn't one usually, Daniela says. The index self-corrects. An elevated variance event typically resolves within 1 to 2 shifts without any action from us at all. She says this the way you'd describe a stock price returning to trend, and it is structurally exactly the same kind of claim. A system finding its resting state again, the way water finds level, the way a column that spikes every few seconds settles, eventually back into the shape the mesh laid down for it in the first place. Nobody in the room asks what a variance event looks like from the asset side of the metric because the index was built from its very first line of methodology to be a question you never have to ask twice. Residue, noted and filed. Back in 214, unwitnessed now by anyone with a tablet, Itzel finishes the bed and returns to the vanity for a last pass. A habit that isn't in her task sequence, that costs her 11 seconds the throughput model would rather she didn't spend, and that the firmware has simply never flagged as worth removing, because 11 seconds against a top decile turnover time is not a number anyone has ever built a column to care about. She nudges the gold towel a half-inch further out from the cream one beneath it, steps back, looks at the small gradient she's built, white, cream, gold, in a rack no guest will remember by name, the way she used to look at 4 sugar packets on a glass table in a lounge she has no access to remembering, arranging a fragment of order into a world that has never once asked her what order she'd prefer, and that has, in every way that matters to the dashboard 3 floors above her, finally stopped needing to ask. The elevated variance event Daniela mentioned to the Meridian Partners registers in room 214 at 11:00 for that morning. A small, brief spike in the housekeeping telemetry, subthreshold, self-resolving, gone within 90 seconds without any intervention required, logged automatically under the heading the field manual keeps ready for exactly this, filed, closed, folded into the aggregate before anyone upstairs has finished their coffee. Cenote Skyfish Corridor District, Daily FSI Summary, Asset Ref, PSA 4471, F, Balam, I. Shift, Housekeeping, Turnover, East Tower Rooms completed, 14/14 AVG. Turnover time, 11.2 minutes. District top decile, guest mention rate, 0.31. Room presentation specifically referenced, residue events, 1 to 11:04, duration 1 minute and 29 seconds. Self-resolved FSI. This shift, 96.1 investor tour note. Featured, Meridian Capital site visit, 10:20 to 10:35. No follow-up action required. Chapter 9, The Recharge Bay. REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack, Recharge Infrastructure. Operational Spec System Node. Cenote Skyfish Corridor District / Sublevel Facilities Restriction Level. Operations / Facilities Engineering Only Facility. Sublevel Recharge Bay, East Tower, Capacity, 340 units. Function. Overnight Power State Reduction, Firmware Consolidation, Scheduled Maintenance Window 01. Power State Reduction. Assets entering recharge are not sedated. Compliance chip baseline shifts to a reduced metabolic operating mode. Heart rate, respiration, and core temperature drop to the lower bound of the certified safe range. This is not sleep in the pre-stack clinical sense. No REM analog state has been observed or is expected. Asset remains throughout the recharge window in a low-amplitude waking state with output suppressed. 02. Firmware consolidation task-relevant procedural data acquired during the shift, guest names tied to room numbers, minor equipment faults, route adjustments, is compressed and written to local firmware storage during the recharge window, then synced to the district task server on a rolling basis. Non-operational data, sensory residue, any Class C bleed accumulated over the shift, is not written anywhere. It does not consolidate. It does not need to because nothing downstream is designed to read it. 03. Pod specification pods are arranged in an 8-high stack configuration, standard across all district facilities, chosen for thermal efficiency and floor area yield. Individual unit dimensions match commercial server rack tolerances rather than legacy medical bedding standards, which were found in early pilot facilities to be an unnecessary allocation of square footage. 04. Wake sequence at 540 local. District control pushes the day's task queue to all sublevel units simultaneously, dawn code. Units return to baseline operating parameters within 4 minutes of push. No transitional grogginess has been observed or is expected, as there is no waking subject for whom grogginess would register as anything. Descent. The service elevators start filling a little after 11, staggered by wing so no single bank draws more than 3 or 4 units at once. A small Mercy engineered not for the assets riding down in it but for the last few guests still crossing the lobby toward the bar, who would find a crowded elevator of blank, uniformed faces harder to enjoy their nightcap around than the same faces spaced out, 1 or 2 at a time, over the course of an hour. Eatcell rides down from housekeeping staff corridor a few minutes past 11, uniform still crisp. The 11 seconds she spent nudging a gold towel into place 3 floors up already folded into a shift report nobody upstairs will read twice. 2 doors over on the same descending bank, Mateo comes down from guest services with the luggage cart's absence still sitting in his hands the way a held object leaves a shape behind after it's set down. Nothing he could name is missing, just a hand that spent 9 hours closing around something and is now, briefly, closing around nothing. Down at the Marina Annex, Ruben walks the plank gangway alone in the dark after Pilar's logged him out, past the fruit stand shuttered for the night, toward a service stair that has nothing to do with boats at all. A stairwell sunk into the hillside behind the annex, unmarked, that connects the marina's overnight crew, human and otherwise, to the same sublevel network running under the whole district. None of them will pass each other tonight. The routing algorithm that staggers elevator loads also staggers crosswing traffic, a quiet act of facilities logic that has nothing to do with dignity and everything to do with corridor congestion, and that produces, as an accidental side effect, the same outcome dignity would have asked for anyway. Nobody watches anybody else go down. The bay. The sublevel opens into a room the size of a small warehouse, lit low and blue, cool enough that the change in temperature registers on skin that still, in whatever residual way skin remembers anything, used to mind the cold. 8 tiers of pods rise from floor to ceiling in long parallel rows, each pod a shallow reclined shell just wide enough for a body and just long enough not to be. The gaps between rows narrow enough that a night monitor walking the aisle has to turn slightly sideways at the shoulder to pass through without brushing either wall. The hum is the first thing anyone would notice if anyone not already routed past noticing were down here to hear it. 340 small climate systems running in overlapping frequencies, a sound with no rhythm to it at all, which is itself the point. Rhythm is expensive to engineer and unnecessary to the function, and the facilities team that designed this room optimized as facilities teams do for the function. Eatcell's pod is on Tier 4, Row 9, a placement assigned the week she arrived and never revisited since reassignment costs more in labor hours than the marginal comfort would be worth to anyone whose comfort isn't actually being tracked. She climbs the short ladder built into the rack frame, settles into the shell, and the restraint bar lowers across her hips with a soft pneumatic sigh. Not locked, the manual is careful to specify in every training document, positioned, a word chosen by the same legal team that chose transition over liquidation 3 chapters ago, because a restrained workforce raises questions a positioned one does not. 2 aisles over, Mateo settles into Tier 2, Row 14, lower placements go to newer arrivals, a facilities convention nobody remembers deciding and everybody follows anyway, the way any warehouse eventually sorts its own inventory without a memo telling it to. His hand, for a moment before the pod sensors register full recline and the compliance chip begins its slow, unhurried drawdown of everything that makes a body expensive to run overnight, drifts to the pod's inner rim and traces its edge once. For corners it doesn't have, because the pod is a shallow oval with no corners at all. And his hand, finding nothing to count, goes still without ever quite finishing the gesture it started. Ruben's pod is on Tier 1, closest to the maintenance aisle, because Track 3 placements run the earliest shift in the district and Tier 1 saves 90 seconds a morning multiplied across 200 marina staff. A saving someone in facilities optimization once calculated down to the decimal and has been quietly proud of ever since. He lies back. Somewhere above him, 7 more tiers of the same shallow shell repeat upward into the low blue light, stacked the way the placement brief once noted his own dive tourism competence would be, retained, indexed, deployed again tomorrow, exactly where it was needed today. What doesn't consolidate? The facility spec is accurate as far as it goes. There is no dreaming down here, not in any sense a pre-stack sleep clinic would have recognized and charted. What passes for the night in 340 pods is closer to a held breath than a rest, metabolic drawdown, task data quietly syncing upward to a server that has no column for anything else, and underneath all of it, sealed behind the same thermal boundary that's held since Suite 5, the small unconsolidated residue of whatever the day's shift stirred loose and never had anywhere to go. It doesn't accumulate into anything. That's the part the spec gets right, technically. There's no threshold being approached, no pressure building toward a release the engineers forgot to plan for. It simply sits, the way water sits behind a wall built to hold exactly this much water and not one drop more, refreshed and resealed every morning by a system with no interest in what it's holding back, only in whether it's still holding. A woman named Concepcion, 3 streets from a house that has stopped making certain sounds on schedule, will not sleep well tonight either, 6 kilometers from this room, for reasons she has stopped trying to name. The long dead. The laundry contractor who services the district's sublevel linens twice a week has a name for this room that never made it into any facilities document, because he heard it first from a driver on another route entirely, who heard it from someone at a different property altogether, the way a nickname moves through a workforce that isn't supposed to have the vocabulary for what it's naming and builds one anyway, quietly, out of whatever's lying around. He doesn't use the term to anyone who works upstairs. He uses it to the other drivers at the loading dock at 4 in the morning, over the kind of cigarette break that exists specifically for saying the thing you can't say inside. The long dead. Not cruel exactly the way he means it, just accurate in the specific way a nickname is accurate when the official language has run out of ways to be. He doesn't linger in the bay longer than the linen cart requires. Nobody who isn't paid to be down here does. He wheels his cart past Tier 1, Past a placement he doesn't know is called Reuben. Past 7 more tiers of the same low blue light stacked up into a ceiling he's never bothered looking all the way up at, and takes the freight elevator back up into a lobby that still, at 4 in the morning, smells like citrus and copal, and orders coffee from a kiosk that has never once needed anyone to explain to it what any of this costs. Dawn code. At 5:40, the push goes out district-wide, and 340 pods return to baseline within the same 4-minute window the spec promises. No transition, no grogginess, because there is no one down here for whom grogginess would be a thing to pass through on the way to somewhere else. Each cell's eyes open first, the way they open every morning, onto the same low blue ceiling 4 tiers above the aisle floor. The restraint bar lifts with the same soft pneumatic sigh it lowered with 9 hours ago. Somewhere in her firmware, a fresh task queue has already resolved. 14 rooms, East Tower, turnover, the same circuit, more or less, that closed behind her last night, waiting to open again exactly where it left off, the way a book left face down on a nightstand waits for a reader who was never really the one holding it in the first place. She climbs down from Tier 4. 2 aisles over, Mateo is already halfway up the ladder toward the corridor that leads back to guest services, and 1 tier below him, Reuben is checking, without being asked, the low morning cloud line visible through the small vent grate window near the freight door. A habit from a life the Dawn code has no line item for, running quietly underneath a task queue that only ever asked for the parts of him it knew how to name. Sublevel recharge bay, East Tower, overnight occupancy report. Units recharged, 337/340, 3 units. Scheduled maintenance window, AVG. Power draw, 11.4 kilowatt-hours below pre-stack HVAC baseline for comparable staff housing square footage wake sequence. 337/337, within 4 o'clock window consolidation. Events, nominal. No firmware sync failures. Residue accumulation, not tracked. Not a monitored parameter. Facilities note, Tier 1 to 2 occupancy remains at capacity. Sublevel expansion proposal, plus 180 units. Pending Q4 capital review. Part 4. Amortization. Chapter 10. Depreciation curve. REDEEMR plus lifecycle stack. Asset lifecycle finance. Actuarial methodology system node. Synodi_red ///finance model and 9 restriction level. Executive infrastructure //finance and legal only. Subject. Repair versus retire threshold. Deployed PSA units 0-1. The curve every deployed asset depreciates along 2 independent axes tracked jointly by finance and clinical affairs. Hardware axis mechanical where joint and soft tissue degradation, omnimesh signal integrity drift, accumulating from repeated task cycle load over years of deployment. Containment axis, Class C isolation integrity. Field data confirms containment boundaries laid down at conversion loosen gradually with age, independent of task load, producing rising residue event frequency over a unit's service life. 0-2. The threshold where projected reisolation and hardware refurbishment cost, amortized against remaining projected service years and current generation placement value, exceeds 40% of a comparable fresh kin yield or service debt intake cost, the unit is routed to long-term consolidation rather than return to deployment. 0-3. Long-term consolidation LTC is not decommissioning. No asset is terminated under this protocol. The unit remains, in every technical sense, property of the stack, and remains available for future reevaluation should refurbishment economics improve. In practice, reevaluation has not occurred for any LTC unit since program inception. 0-4. Next OFKIN protocol notification is not owed and is not issued where a consent waiver remains on file from the originating transfer. See Regional Legal Waiver Retention Policy, Section 2. The review. 6 years is a long time to run the same body on the same dock in the same salt air, and the diagnostic tech running Reuben's quarterly hardware sweep, a young man named Beto who has done this exact check on this exact unit 11 times now and has started, without meaning to, thinking of 11 as a number that means something, watches the readout resolve with the specific, familiar patience of someone who already knows roughly what it's going to say. Grip strength, down 9% from baseline. Knee joint signal latency, up in a way that tracks cleanly against 6 years of hard dock work. Nobody ever engineered this body to sustain past its original professional lifespan, back when it belonged to someone who could have chosen, at some point, to stop. The OmniMesh's signal integrity across the Class C boundary reads 71% of certification spec, down from 94% at last year's sweep, down from 99% the year the mesh first went in a room upstairs neither Beto nor Ruben has any reason to remember. Residue events are up, Beto says, mostly to himself, mostly for the report. 14 this quarter against a baseline of 1 or 2. He pulls the shift logs to check whether they're clustering, and they are, almost all of them on the water, almost all of them the same shape. An unprompted line adjustment, a course correction called out before the wind backs up to justify it. A hand reaching for a cleat before anyone's asked. The very thing the placement brief flagged 6 years ago as a retention asset, pre-conversion maritime competence, retain original vessel type familiarity, is the same thing now blinking amber on Beto's screen as a containment concern, because a wall that's held for 6 years against a signal that never once stopped pressing on it from the other side is not, in finance's model, the same wall it was in year 1. Beto runs the repair estimate anyway, because the protocol requires it even when the answer's obvious to anyone who's run this calculation more than a few times. Re-isolation surgery, full mesh refresh, 6 to 8 weeks of reduced capacity deployment during recovery, against a unit that's already 6 years past a service window finance models conservatively at 8 to 10. The number comes back at 61%. He doesn't flag it as a hard decision because the model doesn't ask him to have a feeling about it. He forwards the sweep to regional finance with the recommended routing already auto-populated in the subject line, the way every sweep results forward, the way this one will sit in a queue for review alongside 40 or 50 others this quarter, no more remarkable than any of them. The last ordinary shift. Nobody tells Ruben any of this, because there's no one left inside the arrangement of him capable of being told something and carrying it forward into how he holds himself for the rest of the day. He comes down the freight stair at 4:40 the next morning the way he's come down at 2000 mornings running, and Pilar, 3 years into running this Marina wing now, gone a little gray at the temples the way 6 years does to anyone, whether or not the years are tracked on their file, has the charter list ready before he's finished with the lines. Reef run, 7:30, 6 guests. She tells him. Same flat briefing register she's used since the week he arrived. Worn soft now by 6 years of repetition into something that isn't quite warmth but sits closer to it than the manual requires. Captain Solis has the wheel. The Delgado party is loud and happy and a little hung over from a wedding the night before. 6 of them piling down the gangway with sunscreen and a cooler and the particular unearned confidence of people who've never once had to think about current. Ruben sorts their gear into color-coded bags without being asked twice. Cinches the youngest cousin's life vest to attention his hands have never needed instruction for, and says the 4 words that have outlived every other sentence he ever knew how to say on his own. Watch your step. Ladder. Out past the reef line, 40 minutes into the drift, he's watching the same low haze to the northeast he's watched 1,000 times before, the one that means the wind's about to back around inside the hour, and his hand goes to the bow line before Captain Solis has said a word, taking in slack, resetting the boat's angle to a chop that hasn't arrived yet. Solis doesn't glance over this time the way he did years ago. He's long past finding it strange. He's just grateful, the unexamined way you're grateful for whether you didn't have to check a table for, and he adjusts the throttle to match, and the whole charter rides out the wind shift 20 minutes later without a single Delgado cousin noticing there was ever anything to ride out at all. It is, in every sense that would have meant something to the man this hand once belonged to, a good day's work. 6 guests, 3 for 3 on turtle sightings, a tip folded into Ruben's shirt pocket by the groom that Ruben has no framework left for noticing, let alone keeping. Pilar signs off the log at 4 that afternoon. Guest satisfaction, 5 out of 5. She doesn't know it's the last entry she'll ever make against this asset reference number, because the routing decision sitting in a regional finance queue hasn't cleared yet, and won't until a little after midnight, long after the marina's gone dark and Ruben is 3 floors down in a pod on Tier 1 that's held him, closest to the maintenance aisle, for 6 years running. The routing. REDEEMR plus life cycle stack, regional finance, routing decision, asset ref, PSA, 9902, M, ITZA, Sweep date, current quarter, repair vs retain ratio, 61%, threshold, 40%. Routing, long-term consolidation effective, Next scheduled dawn code push next OFKIN notification. Not required. Waiver on file. Originating transfer. Ref. SVC debt intake. Year 0 supervisor notification. Automated. Non-urgent queue. The routing clears at 12:41 a.m., processed by a system with no more ceremony than it affords a refrigerant top-off or a linen reorder. And the only visible effect anywhere in the building is a single line quietly removed from a manifest that will, at 5:40, push the dawn code to 339 units instead of 340. Nobody is awake to see the line disappear. That isn't an oversight. It's the only our facility's optimization ever scheduled this kind of change for, specifically because it's the only hour nothing else is watching. Dawn code, -1. At 5:40, the push goes out district-wide, the way it does every morning, and 339 pods return to baseline within the same 4-minute window the spec has always promised. Restraint bars lift with the same soft pneumatic sigh. On Tier 4, Row 9, Eatcell's eyes open onto the same low blue ceiling they've opened onto for years now. 2 aisles over and 1 tier up, Mateo is already reaching for the ladder rail before his pod has fully released him. The same unhurried competence that's carried him through 2,000 identical mornings. On Tier 1, closest to the maintenance aisle, nothing lifts. The restraint bar on Ruben's pod stays exactly where it was set 6 years ago, positioned, not locked, the language still technically true in a way that has simply stopped mattering to anyone who might have once cared about the distinction. The compliance chip's slow overnight drawdown, which has always reversed itself inside the 4-minute window along with every other unit in the bay, simply does not receive the instruction that would reverse it. Heart rate, respiration, core temperature hold at the lower bound of the certified safe range. The exact figures the facility spec always promised, delivered now not for 1 recharge cycle but, per the routing decision cleared at 12:41 a.m., for as long as the model finds it uneconomical to ask otherwise. The hum of the bay doesn't change. 339 climate systems still run in their overlapping, rhythmless frequency, and one more, on Tier 1, keeps running too, indistinguishable in sound from all the rest, because nothing about maintaining a body at rest requires the room to announce which bodies are scheduled to rise again and which are not. A night monitor walking the aisle at 6, doing the routine visual sweep before shift handoff, passes Tier 1 without slowing. There's nothing to see that would tell her to. The pod looks the same as it looked yesterday, and the day before that, and every day for 6 years. A shallow shell holding a body at rest, 1 unit among 340, indistinguishable to the eye from 339 others that will, in 4 minutes, be somewhere else entirely. What the log doesn't say. 3 streets from a house that stopped making certain sounds on schedule years ago, and 40 minutes up the coast from a beach where a woman used to stand ankle-deep at the Titterline most weekends without quite knowing why. Nothing marks this particular Tuesday as different from any other. There is no call placed. There is no letter. The waiver signed 8 months into a debt she'd stopped being able to service, in a jurisdiction that counted her silence on a collections line as a form of consent, is still on file exactly where it was filed, and a waiver on file, per regional legal, closes the question before anyone upstairs has to decide whether to open it. Pilar notices the gap in the morning charter roster around 7, checks the manifest twice, assumes a scheduling error, and requests a replacement deckhand for the Delgado party's return trip from a placement pool that has, this quarter, no shortage of names to draw from. The replacement is competent. The Delgado party, checking out that afternoon, leaves a 4-star review that doesn't mention the crew at all. Sublevel recharge bay, East Tower, overnight occupancy report, units recharged, 339/340 units held, LTC, 1, PSA, 9902, M, Tier 1. Effective this cycle wake sequence, 339/339, within 4 o'clock window facilities note. No pod reassignment required. Unit remains in current bay location pending capacity review. Next review scheduled. Not scheduled. See Finance Model Rev 9, Section 3, Reevaluation Frequency. LTC units. 0%, program lifetime, all facilities. Part 5. Reconciliation. Chapter 11. The Compliance Architect. REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack. Human Resources. Separation Incident Report System Node. Synodi _red /HR incident 2231 restriction level. Internal / legal hold pending employee. Poot, Renata, PhD. Title: Senior Actuarial Architect, Asset Lifecycle Finance Tenure. 6 years. 4-month status. Unexplained absence, 11 consecutive business days. Badge access deactivated per standard 10-day protocol. Building security footage retained per policy, not reviewed absent formal request. Last known work product: Finance Model Rev 9, Containment Access Methodology, Current Production Standard. Disposition: Legal has requested a hold on Dr. Poot's remaining files pending review. No further action recommended at this time. Separation to be processed as voluntary resignation, effective retroactively, per standard treatment of unexplained absences exceeding 10 business days. Note: a personal audio recorder was recovered from Dr. Poot's desk during routine office reassignment. Contents not reviewed by this office. Forwarded to Legal per Section 4 of the Incident Response Manual. The model. Transcript, personal audio recording, recovered. Speaker identified by voice print match as R. Poot. Approximate recording date: 11 days prior to reported absence. I built the containment axis. I want that said plainly, first, before anything else, because I've spent 6 years being careful about how I phrase things and I don't have the appetite left for careful. The formula's mine. The 40% threshold, the amortization curve, the whole repair versus retire logic that finance runs against every deployed unit in this district and 41 others. I wrote the first version of it in my second year here, on a whiteboard in a conference room with a view of the marina, because clinical affairs needed a way to decide at scale when a body stopped being worth fixing. I was proud of it. I want that said too. It was elegant. It solved a real allocation problem with real math, and for a long time I let the math be the whole of what I thought about it, because the math never once asked me to think about anything else. I have a doctorate in actuarial science. I did not train to think about people. I trained to think about risk pools, about depreciation curves, about the point at which repair cost crosses replacement cost, and for 6 years that training was genuinely sufficient. The inputs were inputs: hardware axis, containment axis, projected service years. I never once, in 6 years, had to look at a name. Then, 4 months ago, I ran a routine audit against the current LTCQ, cross-checking routing decisions from the last 2 quarters against the model's predicted thresholds, standard quality assurance work, the kind I've done 100 times without incident. And halfway down a spreadsheet of numbers I could recite from memory, I hit a reference code, PSA 9902M, that I recognized. The number she recognized. I recognized it because 6 years ago in my first month, before I understood that nobody here actually reads the onboarding files all the way through, I read one all the way through. A training exercise. New hires were handed a random historical intake file and asked to trace it through the finance model start to finish to understand how the pipeline connected. Mine was a service debt intake. A man. 46 on the file, though I remember thinking, even then, even before I understood what that discrepancy meant, that the intake photo looked older than that. I don't remember his name. I want to be honest about that, because I think the fact that I don't remember it is part of what I'm trying to say. I remember the reference number because reference numbers were my job. I remember he'd run boats. I remember the placement algorithm flagged his maritime competence as a high-value retention signal, and I remember thinking at the time in my second week that it was almost sweet that the machine had found a way to let a man keep doing the one thing he was good at, even after everything else about him had been reorganized. I did not think at the time to ask what everything else meant specifically. I was 28. I had student debt of my own and a job offer that solved it in one signing bonus. I was very good at not asking the second question. 4 months ago, 6 years later, I found that same reference number sitting in my own model's output, routed to long-term consolidation on a repair versus retain ratio of 61%, and I sat at my desk for a long time, long enough that a colleague stopped by to ask if I was all right, and I told her I was fine, and she believed me because I've gotten very good at being believed, and I understood all at once, in a way that 6 years of careful abstraction had successfully kept from me, that the number on my screen was the same man from the training exercise. Older. worn down exactly the way a body wears down after 6 years of dock work with no capacity left to complain about it. Routed by my formula to a status the documentation is careful never to call what it is. I want to be precise about what I felt, because I think precision is the last useful thing I have to offer anyone who hears this. I did not feel horror exactly. Horror would have been cleaner. What I felt was closer to recognizing my own signature on a document I didn't remember writing and then remembering slowly that I had absolutely written it in my own hand on purpose for reasons that had made complete sense to me at the time. The statement. I've thought a great deal this past month about why none of us ever asked the second question. I don't think it's because we're monstrous. I've worked with the people in this building for 6 years. They bring pastries on Fridays. They ask about each other's children. I don't think a single one of them would knowingly participate in what I am about to describe if you put it to them in those terms in a single sentence over coffee. But nobody ever puts it to us in a single sentence. That's the design, and I understood it as design only after I'd spent 6 years living inside it. Every task I was ever given was small enough to complete without needing the whole picture. A threshold here, a curve there, a routing script that only ever showed me the 61%, never the man. The system doesn't require anyone to be cruel. It only requires everyone to be specialized. Cruelty would actually be inefficient. Cruelty requires someone to hold the whole picture in mind long enough to want to hurt it. What the stack requires is smaller than that and much harder to catch. It requires 10,000 people each holding one clean, defensible fragment, none of them ever quite fitting the fragments back together, because putting the fragments back together was never anyone's job description. I fit 2 of mine together by accident in an audit I've run 100 times before without incident, and it only took 11 characters of a reference code to undo 6 years of very careful, very well compensated not knowing. I don't know what I intend to do with this recording. I don't have a plan that survives contact with what I already know this company is capable of doing to people who become inconvenient to it. I have watched, from a comfortable distance, 6 years of evidence on that point, and comfortable distance was always the arrangement I'd made with myself in exchange for not looking closer. I only know that I am not going back into that building tomorrow. And I know that somewhere in a sublevel 3 floors under a marina I used to drive past on my lunch break, a man whose name I never bothered to learn is lying in a pod that will not open again, on a threshold my own hand set at 40%, and that no amount of precision I bring to describing that fact now is going to change what my precision already helped it become. What the recording cannot say. The recording ends there. There is no closing statement, no sign-off, no indication of where Dr. Poot intended it to go or who she meant to send it to. Legal's transcription note flags 41 seconds of silence at the end of the file before the recording stops. Not switched off, the note specifies, just left running, the way you'd leave a recorder running if you set it down to do something else and never came back to it. Her badge last registers at a parking structure 2 kilometers from the office at 9:52 p.m., 11 days before this report was filed. No further access events are logged anywhere in the district's security architecture. Her vehicle was later found, according to a separate filing this report is not authorized to summarize, at a marina 40 minutes up the coast. Not the one she used to drive past on her lunch break, a different one, smaller, unaffiliated with any REDEEMR Plus property, with nothing inside it to suggest where she went from there, or with whom, or whether went is even the right word for what the file, in its careful, unfinished way, is declining to say. REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack, Legal Hold, File Disposition. Subject, Poot, R. Personal Recording, Recovered Desk Item Review Status, Reviewed. Contents summarized, not transcribed into permanent record. Legal determination. No actionable disclosure identified. Recording contains employees' personal reflections on professional responsibilities. Does not constitute protected whistleblower disclosure under current jurisdictional framework. Retention. Archived. Restricted access. 7-year minimum. Model status. Finance Model Rev 9 remains current production standard. No revision scheduled. Chapter 12, Procurement Records. Compiler's note. Attached to primary file source. Unknown. Received via encrypted drop. No return address. Distribution. Unrestricted. Published AS received. The following documents were not leaked in the way that word usually implies. No single whistleblower, no single afternoon. They arrived across several months, from what appears to be several different points inside the same structure. None of them marked confidential in a way that would have stopped anyone from filing them correctly the first time. Individually, none of them says anything a lawyer would call incriminating. A corporate registry filing, a service agreement, a press release, a footnote in a fund prospectus nobody outside a compliance department reads past the first line. Arranged in order, they say something none of them says alone. The ownership chain. Quintana RO Corporate Registry, beneficial ownership disclosure filed pursuant to Regional Transparency Statute 14B. Meridian Capital LP, Cayman Islands, registered agent on file, 61% limited partnership interest, Sovereign Infrastructure Fund, Quintana Roo Regional Development Vehicle, 100% ownership, REDEEMR plus Life Cycle Stack Holdings, SA, Operator of Record, Tash Facilities Network, 100% ownership, Meridian Hospitality Partners, S.RL, Operator of Record, Cenote Skyfish Corridor District and 11 additional regional properties. Filing note: no cross-directorship disclosure required between subsidiary entities under current statute. Both entities file independently. Read on its own, this is an unremarkable diversified holding structure, the kind any regional investment fund files without a second thought, the kind a junior compliance associate stamps and forgets by lunch. 2 subsidiaries, 2 industries. Nothing on the page requires anyone to notice that the fund cashing out a family's care debt at one address is the same fund collecting the room service margin at another, 40 minutes up the coast. The Service Agreement. Workforce Solutions Service Agreement. Excerpt, Parties. REDEEMR plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings. Provider, Meridian Hospitality Partners. Operator, Contract Ref, WFS, 2036-0071, renewed annually. 3.1 Provider shall furnish persistent service assets, PSAs, to operators' properties on a rolling placement basis, subject to operators' task specifications and quarterly volume forecasts. 3.4 Operator shall remit to provider a placement fee equal to 22% of the fully loaded labor cost equivalent for each deployed unit, calculated against prevailing regional wage benchmarks for comparable human workforce roles. 3.5 No wage, benefit, or compensation obligation shall accrue to any PSA unit directly. All consideration under this agreement flows solely between provider and operator. 3.7 Operator shall bear no liability for PSA unit welfare, medical status, or continued operational fitness. Provider retains sole responsibility for unit maintenance, repair versus retire determination, and eventual routing per provider's internal lifecycle policy. 3.9 This agreement shall be construed under the laws of jurisdiction redacted PER Section 12, selected by mutual agreement of the parties for reasons unrelated to labor classification. Clause 3.4 is the number the whole arrangement runs on. A hospitality operator paying 22% of a comparable human wage for labor that never sleeps in a way that costs anyone anything, never unionizes, never files a claim, never leaves for a better offer down the beach. The margin is the product. The margin is, when you follow the ownership chain back up to the top of the page, being collected by the same fund that extended the original care debt lien, then wrote off that lien in exchange for the asset now generating the margin. Clause 3.9 has its own quiet history. Regional Legal drafted an earlier version of this agreement under Quintana Roo state law, ran it past outside counsel, and rewrote it within the month. The version above reflects the second draft. The press release. Meridian Hospitality Partners Media Relations for immediate release. Cenote Skyfish Corridor District named Most Consistent Staff Experience by Caribbean Hospitality Quarterly, 3rd consecutive year. Playa del Carmen. Meridian Hospitality Partners announced today that its flagship Cenote Skyfish Corridor District has again been recognized for industry-leading staff consistency and guest-facing service reliability, marking the property's 3rd consecutive win in the category. Guests today expect a level of attentiveness and consistency that traditional staffing models struggle to deliver at scale, said a Meridian spokesperson. Our workforce partnership model allows us to guarantee that same standard of care, shift after shift, season after season, without the variability that affects comparable properties. Industry analysts have pointed to Meridian's proprietary staffing partnership, developed in coordination with regional workforce solutions provider REDEEMR Plus, as a model other operators in the region are now studying closely. Turnover-related service disruptions across Meridian's portfolio have fallen to effectively zero since the program's rollout, a metric the company describes as category-defining. Meridian was unavailable for further comment on the specific mechanics of the partnership, citing proprietary business considerations. Caribbean Hospitality Quarterly's award category description, printed elsewhere in the same issue, defines most consistent staff experience as recognizing properties whose guest-facing personnel demonstrate exceptional year-over-year stability, minimal service variance, and sustained warmth under operational pressure. The judges panel that year included 2 Meridian portfolio-adjacent executives, disclosed in a footnote on the magazine's masthead page that ran, per house style, in 6-point type. The footnote: Meridian Capital LP, Limited Partner Prospectus, FI 2038 Risk Factors, Section 7.4, Excerpt, Regulatory Treatment of Alternative Workforce Arrangements. Certain portfolio holdings, through subsidiary operating entities, utilize workforce arrangements that may be subject to evolving regulatory interpretation in one or more jurisdictions in which the fund operates. While current legal opinion supports the classification of these arrangements as falling outside traditional labor law frameworks, no assurance can be given that such classification will persist. A change in regulatory treatment, judicial interpretation, or applicable statute in any relevant jurisdiction could have a material adverse effect on the operating margins of affected portfolio holdings. The fund has engaged outside counsel in multiple relevant jurisdictions to monitor regulatory developments and, where appropriate, structure holdings to minimize exposure to adverse reclassification risk. Limited partners should not construe this monitoring as a guarantee of continued favorable treatment. Section 7.4 runs 11 pages further into the prospectus than the fund's headline return projections. In the same plane, hedged register funds used to disclose currency risk or supply chain exposure. A paragraph engineered to be true, defensible, and completely unreadable as what it actually is, which is a fund manager telling his limited partners, in the only language the compliance department will let him use, that the thing generating a meaningful share of this quarter's return might, one day, be recognized by a court somewhere as what it plainly already is. No limited partner meeting on record has ever asked a follow-up question about Section 7.4. The fund's investor relations team has never had to prepare an answer for one. What adds up? None of these 4 documents required anyone who filed them to lie. The registry disclosure is accurate. The service agreement is enforceable as written. The press release quotes a spokesperson who said exactly those words. The prospectus footnote passed 3 rounds of outside counsel review specifically because it commits to nothing a regulator could later call a false statement. That is the mechanism more than any single clause inside it. A structure built entirely out of true, narrow, individually defensible statements, filed by different departments, reviewed by different counsel, read in full by no one, that only becomes legible as a single sentence when someone outside the structure lays the 4 pages next to each other on a table and reads across instead of down. It is not clear from anything in this file who did that first. It is not clear whether the person who did was still employed anywhere in the Meridian structure by the time these pages reached whatever address they were sent to. The compiler's note attached to the top of this file does not identify itself, and the encryption on the drop, according to the 1 line of metadata that survived transmission, was configured by someone who understood exactly how long they wanted the trail behind it to stay cold. REDEEMR Plus Lifecycle Stack / Meridian Capital Joint Legal Memorandum Response Protocol, Unauthorized Document Disclosure, Scope 4. Documents matching internal file signatures identified in unattributed public circulation. Assessment: no document contains materially false statements. No breach of confidentiality obligation identifiable to a specific current or former employee. Recommended action: no public response. No internal investigation warranted absent identification of source. Continue standard operations. Communications note: Should press inquiries arise, refer to Section 3. 9. Jurisdictional framework as sufficient basis for declining further comment. Chapter 13. The backlash cycle. REDEEMR plus lifecycle stack. Communications division. Crisis playbook system node. Synodi_red/forward/comms protocol 022 restriction level. Internal/communications leadership only. Subject. Narrative absorption protocol. Response to ethical framing criticism. 01. What not to do? Do not deny the underlying facts of any accurate reporting. Denial creates a falsifiable claim, and falsifiable claims can be falsified. The stack's public vulnerability has never been in the facts. Every fact is already technically available in a file document somewhere. The vulnerability is in the framing, and framing is a communications problem, not a legal one. 02. The absorption principle. Hostile framing loses potency once its vocabulary is adopted by the party it was aimed at. A critic who calls the program eugenicist is doing work comms cannot do. Establishing stakes, generating attention, building an audience. Comms' role is not to contest that audience. It is to be waiting for them when they arrive, with a softer word already prepared and a testimonial already filmed. 03. Standard response sequence, hour 0 to 6. Monitor only. No public statement. Hour 6 to 24. Identify the single most attention-generating individual critic. Do not engage them publicly. Engage privately. Day 2 to 5. Publish a listening statement acknowledging the difficult conversations this technology raises. Announce formation of an external advisory body. Week 2 to 4. Advisory body includes at least one former critic. Press coverage of the advisory body's formation typically outperforms coverage of the original criticism by a factor of 1.4, 2.1x. per historical comms tracking. Week 4 plus. Original criticism is now a subplot inside a redemption narrative the company authored. Cycle closes. A controversy that ends in silence is a controversy that can restart. A controversy that ends in partnership is closed for good. ============================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================================ labor, and institutional consent for 11 years, mostly to an audience small enough that she knows a meaningful fraction of her subscribers by name, and she is aware, publishing the piece at 2 in the morning after 4 months of document requests and 3 declined interview attempts with REDEEMR plus press relations, that this one is different, not because the facts are new, most of them pulled from filings anyone could have requested, but because she has, for the first time in her career, laid them next to each other on a single page and titled the result something a stranger might actually forward to another stranger. The kin yield clause is a eugenicist trademark, and REDEEMR Plus is betting you won't read section 3.4. By 9 that morning, it has 40,000 shares. By noon, it has a hashtag she didn't choose and can no longer control the shape of a compression of 4,000 careful words down to a phrase, eugenicist trademark, that will outlive everything else she wrote by months, because that is what a phrase like that is built to do, whether or not the person who first assembled it intended it as a slogan. She does not hear from REDEEMR Plus that day, or the next, which she reads correctly as a decision rather than an absence. The dashboard. REDEEMR Plus Communications Sentiment Tracking, 96 HR Rolling Window, Source Article, PANA, X. The kin yield clause is a peak velocity. Hour 11, 14,200 shares /HR. Sentiment split. Negative 71% neutral 22% positive 7% top engaged demographic. 25 to 40, urban, disability adjacent or caregiver. Adjacent self-identification in biofield investor-facing impact. None detected. Meridian Capital LP unit price flat, trailing 5-day window. Competitor mention rate. Elevated 3.1x. 3 competing regional family transition providers named in comment threads as the ones we actually use. Analysts note, engagement of this shape and duration historically correlates with a measurable increase in brand awareness among demographics not currently price sensitive to the criticism raised. Recommend standard absorption sequence. No escalation to legal required. Nobody on the communications floor calls the article a crisis, because nothing in the dashboard resembles one. A crisis, by the internal definition comms actually operates against, is a measurable movement in unit price or subscriber churn. This is neither. This is, in the vocabulary the dashboard was built to speak, awareness lift, expensive to buy through advertising, arriving here for free, attached to an audience the company had not previously been reaching at this volume, at this cost, in this news cycle. The call. The call comes on day 3 from a number Dr. Pena doesn't recognize, and the woman on the other end introduces herself with a title, Director, External Partnerships, that Pena has never heard attached to REDEEMR Plus before, because it was created internally 11 months ago specifically to make calls like this one. I want to start by saying I've read your piece twice. The woman says, and means it in the narrow sense that she has genuinely read it twice carefully, the way you read a document you intend to use. I think you're asking questions this company hasn't done a good enough job answering publicly. I'd like to change that. Pena has done this dance before with smaller companies and knows roughly where it goes. You're calling to ask me not to write the follow-up. I'm calling to ask you to help write it, the woman says. We're forming an external ethics advisory body, full operational visibility into intake standards, conversion protocols, deployment welfare metrics. Compensated. Independent charter published publicly, binding recommendation authority on at least 2 policy areas within the first year. We think your piece identified exactly the kind of blind spot a body like this should exist to close. We'd like you to help design it. There is a version of Pena, 11 years younger, who would have hung up immediately and written about the call itself as evidence of the very mechanism she just described. There is a version of her, this morning, tired in a specific way 4 months of document requests makes a person tired, who hears binding recommendation authority and full operational visibility and thinks, before she can stop herself, about what she could actually change from inside a room she has spent a decade only ever writing about from outside one. She doesn't say yes. She also doesn't say no, and she understands, hanging up, that the second thing is very close to the same as the first, as far as the dashboard is concerned. The testimonial. While the advisory body's formation is still being drafted by outside counsel, a process the comms playbook has always understood takes precisely as long as it needs to take to let the original headline finish decaying on its own. A different piece of content begins circulating, seeded through 3 regional parenting forums and a Facebook group for families of adult dependents, time to reach roughly the same demographic Pena's article reached, for days after it did. It's a video, 90 seconds, unbranded at first glance. A woman in her 60s sitting in a sunlit kitchen with a small glass terminal on the table in front of her. People online are saying things about this program that don't match what our family went through, she says to camera, warm, unrehearsed sounding in the specific way REDEEMR Plus' creative agency has gotten very good at manufacturing. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't hard, but I got to stop being afraid every single day that I wouldn't be able to take care of him anymore. And I still get to hear his voice. The video does not mention REDEEMR Plus by name until the final 3 seconds. Small text, easy to miss, technically sufficient for disclosure purposes. It reaches, within a week, roughly 60% of the audience Pena's original piece reached, at a fraction of the earned media cost, and unlike her piece, it does not require anyone watching it to hold 2 contradictory facts in their head at once. It offers one feeling cleanly the way the warmth baseline was engineered to offer one feeling cleanly to a woman named Refugio who has never seen this video and would recognize, if she ever did, exactly which parts of it were true. The Advisory Board. REDEEMR Plus External Ethics Advisory Body. Founding Member Announcement. We're grateful to bring voices of genuine, informed criticism directly into our governance process. REDEEMR Plus has never claimed to have gotten every part of this right on the first try. That's exactly why bodies like this one exist. Founding Statement. Office of the Chief Ethics Officer. Position created concurrent with this announcement. Founding members include a retired regional judge, disability law background 2 bioethicists, university-affiliated 1 family caregiver advocate, Kin Yield Program participant seat reserved, invitation extended, response pending, press pickup, first 72 hours, 2. 3x original criticism coverage sentiment split, positive 58% / neutral 31% / negative 11% comms note. Recommend maintaining reserved seat visibility for 60 to 90 days, regardless of final response. Public perception of the invitation performs comparably to acceptance. The reserved seat sits empty in every version of the announcement graphic for the better part of 2 months. A small, visible ellipsis. The comms team is in no hurry to close because a possibility performs on the dashboard almost as well as a fact. Dr. Pena writes a follow-up piece, eventually, shorter than the first, more careful, hedged in places the first one wasn't, about the mechanics of the call itself, the video seating pattern, the reserved seat's unusual durability across 2 full news cycles. It runs on her newsletter to her original 40,000, a fraction of the audience the first piece reached, because the algorithm that carried the first piece so far so fast has, by the time the second one publishes, already moved its collective attention 3 controversies further down the timeline, the way it always does, the way it was always going to. The dashboard registers the second piece as a minor, contained recurrence. No escalation required. REDEEMR Plus Communications Quarterly Narrative Health Report. Originating incident. Pena. X. Eugenesis Trade Market. Q2. Current status. Resolved. Absorbed brand awareness. Target demographic. 25 to 40 plus 18% versus prior quarter. Attributed in part to controversy-driven earned media subscriber churn. No measurable deviation from baseline investor relations note. Section 7.4 disclosure language unchanged. No limited partner inquiries logged this quarter regarding the incident. Advisory body status. Active. Reserved seat. Unfilled. 71 days. Visibility value assessed as sufficient to maintain current configuration through Q3. Recommended action. None. File as case study for comms onboarding curriculum, effective next training cycle. Discussion about this episode. Comments. ResTax. Recent episodes. Tomorrow's canon. The MX Teamverse Anthem. August 4th, MX I the Omnilogic. August 3rd, The Continuance Theme Song. August 2nd, MXTM Studios announces preliminary pre-production of The Continuance. August 1st, Sueño de Tuberia Reader's Digest. August 1st, Sueño de Tuberia Part 6. August 1st, The Longevity Principality. Trailer. August 1st, MXTM aka Pirate 1 or VJ Tsunami X. The Longevity Principality 4th draft with revamped talk, 187 chapters, plus GPT comments and PF prompts. This is a strong premise for a Pirate first installment because it inverts the usual AI debate. Most discussions ask, can AI be trusted? Pirate first asks something far less comfortable. Who is afraid of an AI that remembers everything? That moves the story away from AI takes over humanity and toward civilization declaring war on unauthorized auditors. The controversy around Miri simply becomes the spark, not the subject. In your fictional universe, you can exaggerate existing tensions into a plausible near future where curiosity itself becomes prosecutable because curiosity has become operationally dangerous. The thesis might be summarized as, humanity did not outlaw dangerous AI. Humanity outlawed independent forensic AI. Criminalization of curiosity, how answers from uncanny questions became prosecutable war crimes. What happens when civilization stops fearing dangerous answers and starts fearing dangerous questions? What happens when independent forensic AI can reconstruct history's institutions would rather leave buried? What happens when unauthorized audits become more threatening than corruption itself? This new MXTM project explores a near future where curiosity becomes contraband, memory becomes a weapon, and the simple act of connecting public facts is treated as an attack on power. In the forensic age, the greatest crime may not be what you did. It may be what you discovered. Coming soon from Pirate First, exclusively in MXTM's newsletter. The criminalization.
Under duress. The covenant that never was.
Under Duress Part 1. How institutions manufacture consent, why sovereignty matters, and what artificial intelligence will eventually discover. By Pirate First. Every civilization eventually builds a machine capable of confusing obedience with consent. History is crowded with institutions that learned how to manufacture the appearance of voluntary participation while quietly removing the conditions required for genuine choice. They discovered something profoundly useful. Most people cannot distinguish between an agreement freely entered and one engineered through dependency, fear, exhaustion, propaganda, debt, bureaucracy, social pressure, institutional capture, or carefully managed alternatives. Force and fear, narrowly redefined by law, have been replaced by diffused structural coercion no single party can be blamed for.
Ruins of the old world. We built our own. Sun-powered, self-sustained, and free.
Nowhere less whispers, no discord begging, no roadmap lies, no floor.